Welcome to the Borgen Podcast, the only English language podcast about fictional Danish politics. On our show, we explore the people, events, and parties that make up the fictional Danish parliament on Borgen. I'm one of your hosts, Amy, coming to you from Istanbul, Turkey, and I am, as always, joined by my good friend and co-host Chantal, who broadcasts from her beautiful room with a fabulous view in Toronto, Canada. Welcome.
Welcome. Hello, Amy. How are you?
Hi. I'm hot. It's hot. And not in a good way, well, maybe in a good way, but it is literally hot here. It's now 9 p.m. on, I think it's Saturday. I'm on holiday until Monday, so I don't know what day it is. It's hot and very humid in Istanbul as usual in the summertime, so I'm mostly just trying to stay as cool as possible by eating a lot of watermelon and hanging out with the cats in the shade at home.
Well, it's 2:04 here on a Saturday in Toronto, and the weather is starting to cool down a little bit. So that makes me very, very happy and excited.
Lucky you. I would kill for a snowfall.
Fall is my favorite season. So
yeah, just before we get into our episodes, we're recording this in August. I just wanted to let people know. And so like Borgen, The Power and the Glory has been released in June. And yes, we will get to that. And I watched all of it this earlier this summer, and I just have to say that watching the series, it was great because it's the Borgen universe back, kind of in updated form, and B, to watch a series set in Greenland while you're sitting on the edge of the Mediterranean in 38-degree heat Celsius, that is, was lovely. I was like, ooh, it's snowing there. Oh, that's nice. And like, I'm Canadian. I'm a Canadian national. I lived in Toronto for a long time. That's how Chantal and I know each other. And I never thought I would say this, but sometimes I miss those winters. And I never thought I would say that ever in the history of forever, but apparently I miss them.
Well, you're always welcome to come back here and visit during the winter and help me shovel the snow at my mom's house.
You know what? I'm all in. I have friends here who have a summer house in Spain. You know who you are. And I occasionally get to go there in the summer times when we're all on holiday because they're teachers as well, teacher friends. And I often do a little heavy lifting. I've broken rocks and, helped install stuff there. So it's like, I'm good. I'm a great house guest. I do labor.
Yep. And next time you come visit me, I'll be saving my jobs for you. Anyway, with that, let's get into
yes.
We usually don't talk, and when it's a bonus episode, we talk more, but usually for these recap and discussion episodes, we don't talk as much. So sorry, listeners. Hope we're not boring to you. So we're
never
talking
boring.
about we're never boring. That's what we think. That's what we hope. That's what you think too, listeners. Anyways, so today we're going to be talking about season 2. I'm going to be covering episode 7, and Amy's going to be covering episode 8. So I'm going to start with episode 7 right now, and let's get into it. So episode 7 opens up at Parliament, and we see Birgitte getting dressed in her office, and she's changing her blazer for the 3rd time, clearly caring about how she looks. Niles comes in to tell her that Crohne is here, and she tells him not to go overboard with the special cookies and coffee just because it's Crohne. So Crohne is here to see Birgitte to talk about Africa, and they're seated at a table in her office. And he says to her, for the past 10 years, Denmark has joined forces with the US in wars. Our immigration laws have done away with our image as a tolerant nation. Our poor reputation in the Muslim world has cost Denmark a fortune, maybe 1.5 billion Danish kroner a year. So what's happening is that there's a civil war going on in Kharun, which is whereby the Christian south of Kharun wants independence from the Muslim north. And the north side is opposed to this. So Crohne says that the EU has tried to find a mediator among the union's head of state. And Birgitte says that Africa is a very complicated situation and it's too much of a political risk. She asks Crohne what's at stake for him in Africa, and he says a 5 billion Danish kroner entrepreneurship deal to build oil refineries.
Aha.
Always the oil.
And just a side note,
Yeah.
The country of Kharun is fictional. It's made up, doesn't really exist, just in
Yes.
case anybody wasn't sure.
Don't go look for it on a map. It doesn't
It's
exist.
not there. Yeah.
Brigitte says, quote, the interests of Denmark's largest corporation can't dictate my policy. I'm afraid I'm going to have to let you down. As she stands up from her chair and gestures him to the door. As he's leaving, he tells her that he has had the impression that she was a visionary woman as he towers over her at the door about to leave. She says that she prefers her visions to be her own. So the next day we see Brigitte in her office telling the nanny what to make for dinner, and the nanny's to make sure that the nanny has made sure that Magnus has eaten his vegetables, and a reminder for Laura to take her pill. Next, we see the Freedom Party, which is Svendage, has placed an ad in the newspaper, and TV1 has called 3 times for them to comment on it. This is Parliament and Birgitte and Casper to comment on it. Casper does not really think that Birgitte should be commenting on the Freedom Party's views, but Birgitte says that she disagrees, and this is a chance for them to stand by the laws they've carried through. Later on at home, Brigitte goes with Laura to one of her medical appointments to see the therapist. This is a progress and check an appointment. Laura has been having trouble sleeping, and the doctor says she will get better, but she has to stay on the medication a few more months. Katrine shows up to Parliament and takes Casper behind closed doors for a romantic kiss. They are both happy to see each other and be in each other's company. Katrine is there to talk business about the upcoming interview later that night that Birgitte is participating in to discuss the Freedom Party's ad and Kharun. Katrine also is trying to figure out why Crohne was there at Parliament a few days ago. Casper tells her that Crohne and the Queen play bridge every week. He does not divulge anything, but I don't think Casper knows what Crohne was there about at that point in the episode when Crohne and Brigitte meet. So Brigitte has kept this a secret, that what she discussed with Crohne was between Crohne and her. At TV1, the interview is starting. Brigitte is there with her foreign minister, Hans Christiansen Thorensen, and Svend is there with Hesselbo. Svend asks if the war in Kharun is bringing more refugees to Denmark. Hesselbo asks, won't the PM's relaxed immigration laws lead to more refugees seeking asylum in Denmark? Brigitte answers, quote, yes, Denmark will get more refugees when there's a war in the world, and that the government believes our nation is obligated to help those in need. Katrine asks if Denmark is struggling with financial debt and crisis. She asks, can we afford to be idealistic? Brigitte says, quote, we can't afford not to. We are the 12th richest country in the world. These people are in need. Svend wants to know why she can't help them in their own countries and why they must come to Denmark. Quote, what do these people in their flowing robes want in Danish suburbs? Brigitte says that, quote, their country's at war. Their home is in flames. Svend says, it's wildly naive to think that little Denmark can make a difference. After the TV1 interview, Brigitte is back in her office and has the news on the TV. The reports are saying that many villages have been destroyed. There's rampant violence against women and girls, and North Kharun's UN ambassador rejects this as pure propaganda. The 5 permanent members in the Security Council do not agree on adopting a resolution giving the UN the mandate to intervene, nor were there any actual sanctions imposed. The sole outcome was a declaration of principle urging both parties to stop fighting. Brigitte summons Casper to her office. It's 3 a.m. She says to him, quote, say I told you, I think that we should try to stop the war in Kharun. He laughs and asks her if she's serious. She says she's considering it and that the UN is urging a head of state to mediate. No one has volunteered. Casper tells her that's because it's a lost cause. He tells her that this is all about her and that, quote, you're pissed because you can't force anything through Parliament. She tells him to sit down and tells him that they have a unique opportunity. Quote, we chair the Security Council at the moment. She points out that the Norwegians tried to make peace between Israel and Palestine. Casper says they're killing each other. Birgitte says that the Oslo Accords brought Rabin and Arafat together, and they almost succeeded. Birgitte said she's made up her mind to move forward with this. Bent comes to Parliament the next morning to visit. They fill Bent in on the Kharun business, and Bent says, Birgitte, you're insane. He looks at Casper and asks Casper if he did not try to stop her. But if this is going to move forward, he tells her that this war is being described as Muslim versus Christian, and that we should get a Muslim negotiator, and he suggests Amir. Birgitte goes to Amir's house where she meets him. She tells him she's sorry again for the way things ended and that he's no longer in Parliament. She tells him that she's considering being an EU mediator for this situation in Kharun. Since North Kharun is Muslim, she'd like a Muslim negotiator. He tells her that this is a doomed project and he knows that the polls are against her and asks her if this is not desperate. She says, quote, a major African country faces a catastrophe that could be averted. He tells her that she's just doing it to boost her image and that he's a nice Muslim and political leveler in your prestige project. She says, no, this isn't prestige, and she's asking him to go with her into a burning house. He tells her no, and she leaves. Birgitte has a meeting the next day with Casper, Bent, Hans Christensen, and Hans Christensen's permanent secretary. They're discussing the situation. Hans Christensen says that the British are choosing to follow the Americans on this, which is that they won't pressure South Kharun. France will not pressure North Kharun, nor China, as China has a population of 1.3 billion and increasing energy demands. And they buy their oil in Kharun, which means that Denmark and Birgitte are on their own in this attempt to force them to negotiate. Bent is on Birgitte again, telling her this is crazy. She has 1 year left in power, and this is risky and insane to attempt to negotiate in Africa. But if she's really going ahead, she needs an ally, and he's talking about Crohne. Birgitte meets with Crohne and tells him that she's going to attempt to negotiate in Africa, something we know that would be advantageous to Crohne and, frankly, all of Denmark. And she tells Crohne that if this fails, she wants his support in the media on the front page and to his friends in the opposition. She tells him that if she fails, quote, you're going to go public with your support for me the day after, not on page 8, but on the cover of the right-wing papers. Please remind your friend Hesselbo to commend the PM on her initiative. Crohne is impressed by her and her idea and says they have a deal. Katrina and Hannah Holm go to the residence of someone who is an associate of Crohne's in an attempt to figure out why Crohne and the PM are meeting. And yes, what is the connection and reason? Does it have to do with the war and Crohne's economic interest in Kharun? And is Crohne concealing his business in Africa? The man does not really give solid answers, and Katrine says that the government troops are allegedly behind massacres in Kharun and clear areas for oil companies. And she asks this man if he knows anything about it, and he says no. Later on, Birgitte is meeting with her permanent secretary, Niles, Hans Christensen, and his permanent secretary, and Bent. Amir shows up to Parliament and says that he wants to help now. The situation is too important for him not to help with. Birgitte has the idea for her to personally lead the negotiations. Amir agrees and says, in my experience, this will lend respect to the entire peace project. Birgitte goes home to find the babysitter, Anne, who's still there. Anne has fed the kids and left chicken in the fridge for Birgitte. Birgitte tells the kids that their grandfather, Birgitte's dad, is going to come and stay with them for a bit because she has to go away on a work matter. Laura tells her that she's never home. Magnus is okay with it, but Laura is not as enthused. She comes to talk to her mom alone in the kitchen and says that she does not want to keep taking pills. And Birgitte says she has to. Later, Birgitte calls Philip over for coffee and updates him on things. He's going to stay at Birgitte's house and take care of the kids while she's gone because Birgitte does not want her father to deal with all of this background stuff. And Philip agrees and he'll stay at the house. Later, Niles comes comes to update the group and says that the president will meet Birgitte when she arrives in Kharun. It is a bit of a conflict between Niles and Bent about going to Africa. Niles says he's a liability because Bent was recently sick. Bent says that Birgitte can't do this to him now, and he'll bring a doctor's note, his respirator, and his walker, and he'll be fine. Birgitte, Amir, and Bent arrive in Africa and are met by Veldfield, and who is their contact for Africa. He drives them and says that they've been booked at a hotel where they will stay. They'll also have negotiations and meetings there. He warns them that the rooms are bugged, so be careful. He tells them that the president, Al Jawar, is a Cambridge man, graduate of Cambridge, but he will likely speak to her in Arabic, and he's a bit staunch in his thinking. The representative of the Foreign Office comes to meet Birgitte. Amir, Bent, and the foreign minister, permanent secretary, is also there, and he tells Birgitte the president will not meet you today because he's away on a trip, but one of the advisors from the oil industry will be able to meet. She shuts him down very quickly and tells him, quote, Mr. Begani, I have to remind you, I am the Danish prime minister. I only negotiate on the same political level. I will not negotiate with a civil servant. Begani says he's afraid that there's nothing he can do. And she says, well, my trip was in vain then. And she begins to walk out the door down the hall without stopping or turning around. He follows her and gets on the phone immediately. Amir blasts him in Arabic. And seconds later, Begani and Birgitte he tells her that the president will meet her today in a very short while. Birgitte wants to know what Amir said to Begani, and he said that he told Begani it was a very disgraceful way to treat a Muslim brother, and that the Crohne Industries would like to give their head of state a gift.
So I really liked that, actually. I really liked that. That was one of, and it's so, I mean, like I live, just to interject, I mean, I don't mean to interrupt you, but I do live in a predominantly Muslim country, and that sounds spot on to me. I think, yeah, I can imagine like a Turkish guy saying to an, like,
yeah, so not
so disrespectful.
You disrespected the prime minister, you've disrespected a Muslim brother.
Yeah, who represents, she's there with her. It's kind of connected there. The connection is implied. Yes, it's definitely implied. Yeah.
Yes. So Birgitte and Al Jawar meet. That's the president of or the leader of the North. And Amir, Bent, and the foreign minister's permanent secretary is also in the room. He speaks in Arabic, and Amir translates his words to say, I'm sorry to inform you, but your trip to Kharun is pointless. Our troops have all but defeated the South, so I don't see any reason for us to make any concessions. And he stands up and he's about to leave. And Birgitte says, and I love this so much, she says, allow me to be bold, Mr. President. I'm sure that certain people in the Arab world think of Denmark as an arrogant anti-Muslim nation that is a friend of the US. The West sees you, Mr. President, as a war criminal because of your actions in the Nubizia province in the past 5 years. They certainly don't see you as the highly respected politician and Cambridge fellow that your people regard you as. They say you shouldn't judge a book by its cover, but we still do, don't we? To me, it seems that both of our nations can profit from a change in the international perspective among our nations, wouldn't you say? Is it not worth a couple of hours of conversation? So the president's listening and he says, and he agrees, let's talk. So back at TV1, Katrine and Hannah figured out that Birgitte is not in France, and that Katrine says that she can prove that the PM and Crohne were meeting about Kharun. Katrine had rummaged through Casper's bag when he was over at her place one night. He ran downstairs to pick up takeout. He left his bag upstairs. She looked through it, and she found the itinerary for Birgitte's African trip in his bag. puts Katrine in her place, telling her that she only got those documents because she's dating Casper, and that we cannot give it to Torben because Torben will question her relationship with Casper. And in my opinion, Katrine is out of line, of course, for going through Casper's bag. But that's the problem when you're a TV reporter dating the PM spin doctor, right? So back in Africa, Birgitte and her entourage are traveling to meet Jacob Lakoya, who is the chief of the Tayenga clan. The advisor, who is the guy who's the business associate of Crohne, is who is in Kharun with them, warns Birgitte and says, Jacob Lokoya is a warrior first and foremost, not a sophisticated man. You'd be wise to acknowledge his skill on the battlefield. Be aware of his harsh stance on homosexuality. It's common here. Should he touch the subject, you're best to ignore it. So the next scene now, there's a flat tire, Brigitte's car. So her and Bent get out of the car and the whole entourage is pull over, and her and Bent are standing alone together talking. And they look off into the horizon and they see a group of school children together laughing and walking. And Bent asks her who's taking care of the kids while she's away. And he wants to see pictures of the kids because it's been a really long time since he's seen them. And Birgitte confides in him that Laura has been suffering from serious anxiety and that she's been seeing a psychiatrist who's been putting her on pills. And Bent asks how Birgitte is doing. And she gets emotional and she says it's hard not to be able to help Laura. Bent listens attentively and lovingly and tells her whatever he can do, let him know. She says she hasn't told anyone and it's strange to keep it all in. So the next scene now, the car is fixed. They go to meet Jacob Lokoya. And my first impressions of him is that I really like him. My spirit immediately took to him. He's very warm and welcoming with a kind, big, bright smile. And she tells him that China, if China insists that they win their independence, they will use the North Pipeline to sell the oil to the Chinese. And Bent tells him that, he will be an independent country and freedoms are dictated by whom Jacob and South Kharun will sell their oil to. So Birgitte stresses that China should pay no less than market value for Jacob's oil. She carries herself as usual, so classy and ladylike, and she tells Jacob that it would be an honor for her to conduct these negotiations in Copenhagen. And Jacob has a very positive and thankful attitude, saying that they have great resources in Africa, and they just need to work on them, and that it's not an easy task to create a modern democracy, and that he's trying to reform the South Kharun society in both spirit and in technology. And this is fine, except that he goes on to say that, quote, everyone in South Kharun is entitled to equality and freedom, except the homosexuals, of course. But that is not a problem. There is no homosexuals in South Kharun. It's not part of our culture. And so with that comment, I changed my tune and I don't like him anymore after hearing that come out from his mouth. So getting towards the end of
we were warned.
But I would like to give people the benefit of the doubt that they changed their mind, but not this guy. So getting towards the end of the episode now, back at Katrine's apartment, Casper comes in and confesses to Katrine that Birgitte has been in Kharun for the past 5 days and tells her that it looks as though like peace talks will be held in Copenhagen soon. And remember, of course, Katrine already knows that because she had searched through his bag and found the itinerary. The next morning, back at Brigitte's house, Laura goes to wake Philip, who has slept the night on the couch. It's 7:30 in the morning. Philip tells Magnus to eat his breakfast and that Laura needs to take her pill. She says no, but he insists, and he goes with her to the bathroom and watches her. She puts the pill in her mouth and sips water, pretending to swallow it. A few seconds later, we see that she has not swallowed the pill, and she takes it out of her mouth when he turns her back. The last scene of this episode, episode 7, is that Birgitte and her colleagues are heading back to Denmark on a plane. Everyone is asleep except her, and she looks around at each of them with a look of gratitude and satisfaction firmly on her face. And that was the end of the episode.
Yeah. And the episode I'm going to be talking about is part 2 with the negotiations in Copenhagen. Yes. And it's really quite intense and interesting. I had to step away while you were speaking just for a second because there was a really big beetle in here and I had to throw it out the window. And my cats were a little too interested in it. So I took care of that little crisis. I had a little crisis of our own. We have negotiated with the beetle. The beetle has retreated and withdrawn his presence from the living room to the balcony where he belongs. So there we go.
So my thoughts on this episode, and I'll go from I do have a few points to say. I'll just go from the top a bit, just go down.
So do I. I wrote some things down too.
Okay, great. So I think Philip is a really good dad. And I think that Birgitte should lean on him more. because he's not going to say no to taking care of his kids. He's an excellent father. Okay.
Yes, of course.
And I'm glad that at the end, she chose for Philip to go there and not her father. And the other thing I liked about this episode, so as I told Amy offline, these two episodes that we're talking about today, I'm doing 7, Amy will follow me and talk about 8 shortly, were the two best episodes for me, the most standout episodes, definitely of this season. And I love, again, we talked about this a few episodes ago, is that time moves very quickly here. So, in one part, we see them at home in the parliament, talking about their plan, getting all the ducks in a row with Crohne and all that. We see them go to North Kharun first, then South Kharun, and that goes very quickly. There's no wasted time. The audience is not feeling bored. Like, it's very engaging,
Yeah. These 2 episodes are action-packed and very fast-paced. There's like no downtime.
There's no downtime.
Yeah, it's very intense. And you have this parallel plots, right? There's a crisis developing in Birgitte's home life and the crisis that she's dealing with in Africa. And I have a comment about when Svendaga said, like, these immigrants in their flowing robes. How ridiculous is that? And it was just like, oh my God, may a guy like him never end up in Toronto, where there's like
in power. Yes.
Yeah. Where you can be, I mean, well, we kind of have Dofo, but where you can be in a subway car and you can be the only person from your cultural background in the entire subway car. That is possible in Toronto. You can do that and hear like 5 or 6 or 7 different languages.
Yeah.
And I used to live in the same area as you. Like, I used to live around the east side of Toronto, where there's a huge Greek population. And, I used to really enjoy, like, you could walk down the street on the Danforth in Toronto and you can hear people like start a sentence in Greek, switch to English, and switch back to Greek again without batting an eye.
Well, and I will also say, because I used to live in New York for 4 years, the difference between here and in New York is that people seem to be more proud of their culture, that kids are speaking in Greek. We have a good friend of ours who's listening to this podcast. Hello.
Hi.
Who is Greek background, and listening to her stories, and other Greek friends of mine, one of my best friends is Greek from Greece that moved here. And
hi, I know her too.
You know her too. Yes. At home, you're taught you're going to go to Greek school or learn about Greek dancing, and you're going to learn Greek at home because that's what we're going to talk about.
Yes.
And people are not ashamed of that. And I think when I lived in New York, I didn't experience that. It was more of a melting pot of, oh, you're that. Okay. But now you're American. So just like park that up somewhere.
Maybe with a few exceptions. Like if you're, Jewish, for example, you might learn enough Hebrew, depending on how conservative your family was, you might like learn enough for your like bat or bar mitzvah. Or you might hear Yiddish at home from your like grandparents or something. It would depend, but generally the public voice is English, right? And that's just a different cultural attitude between America, the United States, and Canada. I find that too, like people tend to retain, and also maybe it's a newer generational thing too. People tend to retain their home languages and home cultures. I mean, even look at my background. So my mother's family's French Canadian, but my mother grew up in Western Canada on the West Coast. So there was an enclave of French speakers in Vancouver, made up of mostly Quebec and around like Quebec and Saskatchewan. Oddly, there's a French community there. People who came to like work the sawmills when Vancouver was being developed as a city in the early 1900s. So like my great grandfather spoke French, my grandmother spoke French. When my mother's generation came along in like the late 1940s, 50s, in early 50s in Western Canada, no French. My grandparents didn't speak French to them, to their kids. So I lost my hereditary language. Because it wasn't classy to be French speaking, working class and Catholic in Vancouver at that time. And now my nephew went to French immersion elementary school. So there you go. So, I mean, And I worked in the Toronto school board as a substitute teacher for a number of years. And lots of immigrant kids retained, like, their own names. Names aren't anglicized like they used to be for immigrants as often. You know, kids are they're fine with, like, they seem to accept other, like, oh, your family's Afghani. Oh yeah, mine's from Bangladesh. Oh,
Yeah.
mine's from,
Yeah.
my parents, one parent comes from one Caribbean place and the other comes from another Caribbean place,
Yeah. Yeah.
so it's like very multiculti, and it's really nice, actually. I think that helps societies.
I think so too. So another point I want to talk about in this episode is that, again, we see, and we talked about this in our previous podcast episodes, is that it's odd that Birgitte has no close friends, no female friends. And that's, so when she keeps all this inside, and she says in this episode that it's very hard to keep it all inside. And she tells
with Laura.
I'm so glad she tells Ben.
Me too.
Because he's nothing but loving and caring and mature and responsible, and will always help her.
He's definitely got that parental role figure. He's like a mentor to her.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And I also think that if we saw her with friends, it would add more dimension to her character, but perhaps maybe why the show didn't do it. I was thinking about it. This is kind of odd not to see her ever socializing with friends that don't belong to a government. Is that perhaps it would take time away from her as the PM with regards to screen time and showtime and all that, right?
And is that even realistic? Does the prime minister have time to hang out with her friends? Maybe not so much.
That's true. And the other thing we previously touched upon is that sometimes, especially women friendships with other women, there's a lot of perhaps there could be a lot of jealousy or resentment. How come this panned out with you and not me? And you're a powerful woman, you think you're better than me. Like a lot of
that's a possibility. And in TV land, it's even more of a possibility, right? Because that seems to be a plot line that people pander to frequently. I'm fortunate enough not to have encountered that much in my real friendships, but it does happen. It's something that does happen. It's one of the more destructive aspects of female friendships, actually.
So why do you think Brigitte changed her mind?
Because
in the beginning she said, no, peace talks? I don't want to, she didn't want to do it. She told Crohne this is like too big of a task. And then she, sends it
maybe because I think first of all, it's an opportunity to flex some of her diplomatic muscle. Okay. In a fairly high profile environment. It involves the UN. It's a peace mission, which is something that is aligned with her politics.
Yes.
And it seems like, and maybe an opportunity to extend her own knowledge of how things work outside of Denmark too.
Yes. And I do think ultimately it's also all of those things. Those are definitely in line with her political policies and personal policies of, we don't discriminate against people here. This is a country in need. She talks about Denmark being the 12th richest country. She has to step in, but also she recognizes and can admit that this will, despite all these great humanitarian sides to it, the other side of it is the economical side. And that if they can get peace here, then Crohne can go in. And I think they called $5 billion Danish kroner.
There's always an economic side. There's always, as soon as oil is on the table, if there's oil involved in a quote unquote developing area of the world, Western nations will stick their fingers in. That's just the way it is, because we are oil dependent still. You see, when we get to season 4, this is what the whole of season 4 is about, is about oil rights. So it's interesting that it comes up a few times in the series, but it is an international issue. It's super pressing. We know this from the current political situation with and with like Russia and Ukraine. Russia provides natural gas. I think that damn beetle is back in my house. Anyway, I'll deal with it later. Russia distributes natural gas to most of Europe. And if things go badly there, will gas prices go up? Will my gas be cut off this winter? It's something that I'm actually thinking about. So petroleum resources are always key political issues, no matter where they pop up.
Yeah.
There's one more other little side reference I'd like to mention to people. It's a refugee story that's set in Denmark. A little film came out in 2021 called Flee, and it's Flee is in FLEE, not FLEA. It's not about the Red Hot Chili Peppers bass guitarist. So it's about an Afghani refugee who comes to Denmark via Russia and Sweden and a lot of complicated issues as a refugee. And when he lands in Denmark, he has no identification, like, you know, he's fled illegally. They've done the human trafficking thing that failed. There's a lot of twists to the plot. And when he lands in Denmark, he says to like the Danish passport authorities, refugee. And he gets taken care of by the state immediately in a relatively, it's depicted as a relatively compassionate and accepting way. They're like, he gets taken by, you know, the passport authorities, or they take him to immigration. And he's like, that's it, I'm going to get sent back. I'm done for. And they're like, absolutely not. You're not being sent back. We're going to process you as a refugee and look after you. So that is the Danish policy for refugees, or it was at the time when he arrived in. The film is set in is from 2021. He's looking back on his childhood and youth, and I'm as an adult, and I think, you know, that would have been maybe, I don't know how many years ago. I can't remember the age of the character, but he's like in his 30s, I guess. And it's based on a true story, and he's reflecting back on his life as a refugee because he's also about to marry his partner, who is a man. So there's that angle as well. So not only is he an Afghani refugee, he's also gay, and he finds a place, a home, a safe place in Denmark.
That's great.
So yeah, I mean, not that I'm encouraging everyone to run to Denmark if you're a refugee, but if you happen to get to a country like Denmark,
yeah,
at least you have a chance,
yeah,
you know. And people saying like, why, you know, Sven Dogge giving that classic conservative line, why don't you go back to your own country, which we hear a lot with the Syrian refugee crisis, Ukrainian refugee crisis, all the refugee, Yemen, Afghanistan, pick one. Okay. There's, I think, how many refugees? I saw a statistic, we were talking about it in one of my model UN clubs about the number of refugees. It's like in the millions, 5.5 million refugees in Europe or something, but that might be low. I can't remember if that's, if it's double that. I can't remember off the top of my head, but it's a lot. And the reason why people can't go back is because a lot of the times there is literally nothing to go back to.
Yeah.
I just saw a film. I have a friend here who's a journalist, a photojournalist. He's been in Ukraine. He posted a little story about this woman who owns a pet shop. And she is walking to her pet shop in the morning, and she gets there and it's gone. It's been blown to pieces. What's she supposed to do now? You know, so for people just to be like, why don't they go back to their own countries? It's like, well, how?
Yeah, exactly. So with that, Amy, should we move into to episode 8?
Yeah, let's get into peace talks.
Story. Yeah, let's take a look at that.
Oil, peace talks, diplomacy, and weapons. So, okay, I've divided this kind of, because it was such, pardon me, it was such an intense episode. I've divided it into kind of 3 sections. So I've got the government, I've got the media, and I've got kinds of Brigitte's home life. So I'm going to start off talking about government, and I'll switch back and forth a little bit, but just to keep kind of the plot lines clear, because they're very twisty in this episode. So in Copenhagen, we're back in Copenhagen. Everyone arrives back in Copenhagen. Peace talks between Jakob Lokoja, the South Kharuni leader, I guess, who was elected. Kharunese, yes. Okay, yeah. Was elected on this independence platform. He's elected on his stance to gain independence from the North. And Omar al-Jawar, who's wanted in The Hague for atrocities committed on the South Kharunese, are set to take place in Copenhagen, We see Birgitte watch this on the 6:30 news, so we're up to date as well. I really like that device that the show uses to update the viewer on the plot twists using TV1 reports, as well as like the characters in the story, like everybody gets the information at the same time. The foreign minister has three groups in the negotiations: the oil group, the Sarafan group, and the Green River group. They all have different things that they're asking for. The African Union, the EU, and the UN have sent observers. I was once in a model UN conference where the African Union and the Arab League declared war on each other. That was really exciting for the kids. It was really fun. But fortunately has never happened in real life, I don't think. Casper informs the group, Mir is also there working, that some media is criticizing Denmark for negotiating with a war criminal, and reminds everyone that the warrant from The Hague for Al-Jawar is only temporarily suspended. He arrives first, and as usual, he speaks strictly Arabic with Nyborg, with Amir translating. This is fine, but it does show a level of his stubbornness and his kind of will to assert dominance over her, because he speaks English perfectly. He's a Cambridge graduate.
Yeah,
I mean,
and that's their common language together. She speaks Danish first, but she's conversing in English, and I think it would have been respectful for him to do the same. But again, it asserts dominance.
Yeah, and he only does it when she kind of calls him out. Like, when you mention her speech about like, "May I be bold?" He actually answers her in English after that point.
Yeah, because she called him out and said, and she called him out, and she outed herself to say, "I know you're a Cambridge fellow."
Yeah, and I know you're
you were educated in the UK.
Yeah, and I know you're a war criminal, so don't fuck with me, buddy.
Yeah.
So anyway, she does that, but beautifully diplomatically in her classic style. Immediately there's a crisis. A city in the north is attacked by a southern contingent, it's a city with oil resources. Al-Jawar chastises Birgitte, saying that this is what happens when you deal with Lukoya. He says that in English. He leaves the talks altogether at this point, but remains in Copenhagen. Brigitte's not happy, but what is really happening? Then we see Lukoya arrive. This is the government plot. This is not chronological, so if you watch the episode, it's not going to line up. But anyway, Lukoya arrives and states that the city of Arisia is in fact on the south side of Kharun, and that forces there were defending the city. Birgitte says this situation has affected peace talks, and each side blames the other. The South agrees to drop a proposal, but the North refuses face-to-face negotiations or any action until the South exits Arisia. In talks with Lukoya, the Danish Prime Minister points out to the South that the South should give up claims to Arisia for now to continue peace talks. And Lukoya, in a kind of sexist manner to us, asks Bent for his ideas about it, referring to him respectfully as uncle, which actually I also do to myself. I have Uncle Bent written in my notes sometimes. Bent agrees the city is southern, of course. Yes, we agree the city belongs to the South, but the peace process is more important at the moment. He quotes his own father, Bent quotes his own father, saying, "A new perspective is needed, and to give up Arisia would be beneficial for the time being, and it's a temporary move only to excel the peace talks." Lukoya respects Bent's and therefore Brigitte's ideas, but isn't happy with it. Bent says, "Let Arisia be a no man's land. The South leaves, the North doesn't enter. It's off limits during this peace talk." And he agrees to that. That's okay. When Nyborg presents this idea to Al-Jawar, he won't budge and accuses Birgitte of game playing. So she reaches out to Crohne. Crohne calls and will come to the PM's office. So he arrives there and brings info from a Chinese contact who told him that 40 Chinese helicopters are being sent to the North's capital with the intent of attacking the South. This would ensure victory by the North in a matter of weeks. He wants to remain anonymous. He's like, "You didn't hear this from me." The Chinese ambassador is immediately called for. Casper throws it to the media to let the public know that peace depends on China, which is a gamble. Bent will warn the southern contingent. Amir is charged with keeping the North there, and Brigitte is handling the Chinese. Lukoya is set up with the information regarding the Chinese helicopters and wants to leave and tells Bent this. He's like, he is afraid for his country. He's like, "I gotta go. If they're coming, I gotta go. I gotta go defend my people." And Bent says, "Yes, you do. but stay 12 more hours. And if China doesn't stop in 12 hours, then you go home and defend your people. Give us a chance to handle it.
Yeah.
And Al-Jawar is not happy about the media involvement regarding the helicopters. I'll get to the media stuff after this. But Neuburg's tactic is to humbly ask the Chinese for help, which she does. She tries to convince the Chinese ambassador that if war breaks out, 7% of the Chinese oil supply will be cut off and they will be forced to resupply from somewhere else, which will be costly in money and time and brokering. China appears to walk away with no solution whatsoever, giving the classic excuse, which comes up a lot. Oh, we didn't, we just sold those helicopters. We have no idea what they're going to be used for. That's not our concern.
Yeah,
we're just selling the equipment.
They don't care. They just want the money.
Yeah, the equipment was ordered. What people do with it is not our problem. Okay, it's like if you sell a car to someone and they're going to drive it over their ex-partner, that's not your fault. But it is if they tell you that's what they're going to do. But anyway, so that's the Chinese stance, which is classic. Okay, China walks off with no solution in the air whatsoever. In the morning, it appears China has left as Al-Jawar and his China has left the building. Al-Jawar and his staff officially have also withdrawn. It looks terrible, and even Birgitte slams her desk and yells, "God damn it," till Casper comes in. Then the BBC report via TV1 comes on and says that the Chinese have stopped their aircraft carrier. So the Chinese helicopters are suspended, which is great. And that means the Danes now have 36 hours to continue talks. In the background of the PM's office, there's a whiteboard with some of the terms of the talks that get panned by the cameras a couple of times. Some things that are there, which is great. And this is between all three groups, the Seraphin, Green River and Oil Group. Rights to citizenship, right to their own passport, autonomy, tribal majority, religion. There's a few other things. I thought they were all valid issues. There are things that come up. I might use this in my Model UN. I was thinking as a teacher, because it's summertime, so I was thinking as a teacher, like to use this about how to do diplomacy in my classes. I might use it as an example. So Casper drafts a press release in case everything fails, but he struggles with that. He, Bent, Birgitte, and Sanna are all late at the office. There's this great montage at this point with points for each of the three groups being crossed off the whiteboard. A lot of dossiers are handed out, a lot of coffee and water is being poured, and the work and negotiation goes on. Okay. Now I am going to jump ahead to the sort of, that's like part one. Okay. That's part one of government issue. Now, part one of the media. Okay. Katrine and Casper are mostly living together. It looks like there's an ongoing tension or a bit of a struggle with separation of personal lives and work, as you pointed out. Katrine asks how the PM's office and the foreign minister managed to get the arrest warrant suspended for Omar Al-Jawar, the leader of the Islamic North in Kharun. And Casper replies, "Who's asking? The girlfriend of the reporter." But that seems good-natured. It's kind of like it shows their banter, their back and forth tension. As the leaders arrive at the PM's office, at TV1, they plan to show some photos of murdered Southerners. So there's like, they have evidence of war crimes. Hannah Holm is looking over the photos when she sees Niels Mikkelsen in the photos with Mohammed Aziz, who is a general of Al-Jawar and responsible for many nasty civilian deaths and murders. And he shows these to Katrine. Okay, or she shows these to Katrine. She's like, "Come over here and look at this." As they look at these photos, Torben comes and informs them there's been this attack in Kharun, the Orisia attack. And we see the PM's office, that we've seen at the PM's office, and Hannah tells Torben about the photos, but he's in a rush to put Katrine on the air to talk about the new attack. Katrine, in the seconds before she breaks the story on air, calls Casper and says about this attack and the Mikkelsen thing, and says, "I don't know anything." He doesn't know anything about it. Torben won't act on the photos with Mikkelsen as the peace talks. Mikkelsen is Crohne's guy, by the way.
Right.
But we don't know exactly how he's Crohne's guy. It's never really explained. He's just,
and I think he has a double name.
A business associate. Yeah,
Yes,
that's coming up. I will get there. That is coming up. I will get there. So Torben won't act on these photos because there's no real proof. Mikkelsen is Crohne's man in Kharun, and Crohne has denied knowing about these atrocities. Mikkelsen has denied knowing about these atrocities. He says it's a great story, but needs too much research to do at this moment with all these peace talks happening. He tells Katrine and Hannah can be done after the talks. And they're like, we'll throw it to documentary eventually. So naturally, Hannah and Katrine disobey this directive and go and talk to Mikkelsen immediately. So like, I love it. They're like, did you hear that last part? No, I didn't. So they go and talk to him. So, which is great. And then they're told they need an appointment, but the photo gets them through the door. They go to his house, actually. I believe it's his wife that answers the door.
Yeah, that's right.
Which is pretty bold when you think about it. Like, you don't know who this guy really is. Like, it's pretty bold to mess with him. Anyway, he says, of course, he was horrified at these things. And Katrine hits him straight off, well, what were you doing there if you had no knowledge of these events, which took place before the war, as villages were being cleared out to make way for oil projects. Now, this kind of action in Africa reminds me a little bit of different situations there, like North and South Rwanda. And that was a complete disaster. The UN completely fucked that up, to put it bluntly. There is the Canadian UN troops were there on the ground, as were Belgians, who kind of exacerbated the situation based on what I've read about it. There's an excellent resource called Shaking Hands with the Devil by General Romeo Dallaire, a Canadian general who was there on the ground and has been very public about the PTSD he suffered from dealing with that situation. So if you want an in-depth, actual, factual documentary look at an African crisis where there's tribal warfare and invasions and genocide, read that book. It's the best resource I've found. I think there's also a documentary about it that might be floating around on YouTube by the same name, Shaking Hands with the Devil. If you Google that and Romeo Dallaire, you'll find it. Anyway, so Mikkelsen says he doesn't know about this. He was just passing through. He puts them off. He says, oh, we'll meet later. He's trying to keep control in his hands. He ends up as a no-show in the meeting that they arranged for later. His phone is offline. His landline is a dead end. Katrina points out rightly that he must be hiding something. Hannah points out that if two annoying bitches, that's her words, I love her so much, start calling all his contacts in business, things might get a little bit difficult and awkward for him. So that becomes the plan. Through this, they discover from other colleagues in the Netherlands, you see Katrine on the phone to like a Dutch journalist, that Mikkelsen is known there by another name as an oil industry player, and that villages have in fact been cleared for oil exploration. It seems like oil is being used as an excuse for ethnic cleansing, but it is hard for them to find definitive proof. And this kind of thing happens all the time. All the time. I would say probably in the 20th century, since the end of World War II, and since the end of the Cold War, okay, all the other bits and pieces of warfare that's happened has been at its root cause about resources, and in particular petroleum resources. It's a hot issue. It's a very hot issue. Okay, so now I'm going to touch on a little bit of Birgitte's home life, if I can find my right page. Yeah, okay. So this is a much smaller subplot, but it's also very important, okay? So as we saw, Birgitte has this au pair nanny on to help with Magnus and Laura. And Laura continues to struggle with her anxiety and is resisting taking her medication, as you mentioned. She seems out of sorts when Birgitte has to work extra hours, in fact, days at the office. She's not there for the peace talks. And as you said, Philip is there staying with them. And I think what I really liked about that scene between Philip and Birgitte when they were talking about Laura's problem and him staying there, it's not even an argument. There's no hesitation on his part to be like, I can't do that. I have my own life, or any nonsense. He's just like, of course I'll stay. Of course. They both automatically put the welfare of the kids first.
Yeah. It's wonderful to see.
Yeah. And like you rarely, it's such a civilized, like I realized, they got divorced and like, there's like this, it's problematic. There were problems in their marriage because of her job and stuff. But when it comes to like the post-divorce co-parenting thing, they're doing
They
great.
have it nailed. They're
Yeah.
perfect. They
And
are so in sync. Yeah.
it's one of the most mature and
Emotionally
realistic,
intelligent.
yeah, and emotionally intelligent and kind of realistic portrayals of like a relatively healthy co-parenting situation that I've ever seen.
Yeah.
On TV. I mean, in real life, I've seen it, but on TV, it's usually like that's a really easy way to amp up conflict in a storyline. And
yes,
Borgen, the writers of Borgen, don't stoop to that level.
No, and they don't do the regular. You know, we just recorded a bonus episode just now about Casper Yule, and we talked about the regular. What is the regular story? Oh, we're always used to seeing this, and we're used to seeing that. That's what I love about Borgen. It's not focusing on the traditional or the
That's
what
right.
we're used to seeing. You know, they're going deeper and flipping things upside down and then telling that story, which is
Yes.
far more interesting than the story we've seen thousands of times.
Yeah. And the subplot with Laura here in the background scene, it actually involves Magnus a little.
So yeah, Magnus, which I was so happy to see more Magnus screen time. Yeah.
And yeah, Laura. Me too. Yeah. I really like those kids. And I think both of the actors who played those kids are really excellent, especially Laura. And Magnus is such a young actor playing that role. He does a wonderful job. I love watching child actors who are very good. It's really uncanny. Yes. So,
and this is a very difficult situation Laura's in. It's not like, oh, I have a flat tire on my bicycle. Like she's going through something
major,
shaking her up. Yeah. And Magnus is confused. Anyways.
And concerned about her. Yeah. And so Magnus catches Laura flushing her pill and expresses concern about this to her. Right. He's like, why are you doing that? Why are you doing all these weird things?
Yeah.
But Laura threatens him. Right. He's like, she says, I will never speak to you again if you tell. So this is the child pact, and his eyes get very big at that point.
Yeah, he's scared of his big sister.
Very scared. Yeah. And he knows that he's being asked to do something that's actually wrong.
Yeah.
And not wrong in like, don't tell mom I broke this, but wrong like
in a deep, serious way.
It's pretty serious.
He understands that. Yeah.
Yeah. And he knows it's serious. He's obviously worried about his big sister. And now poor Magnus has an internal moral dilemma for the rest of the episode.
Yeah.
And I will get into that as I come back to this. But now I'm going to move on to the second section of the political, the second section of the media, and the second section of the home life. And then there's like a wrap up at the end.
Okay.
So excuse me if this is going on a little long, but it's pretty deep stuff.
Oh, it's deep. And as we said offline before recording here, the days leading up to us recording, it's a dense.
Oh, yeah. It's a very dense
like how do you tell all of this in one Chantel and Amy podcast episode? But we're trying, and we're trying this out because everything is related here. And as we know, Borgen is very tight the way they write and fast, and it's important to cover everything to tell the whole recap.
Yeah, and of course, these are the second last pair of episodes for the season. So of course they're kind of big. I mean, episodes 9 and 10 are also big, but they need a nice climactic, demonstration of the whole politics thing to like really make it good. And so that's what they do. So let me make sure I'm looking at the right section. Yes. Okay. Government. After the Mickelson scene at TV1, right, where the two annoying bitches go after him.
No, angry bitches. Remember that's
angry. Yes,
that's what.
No, she says annoying.
Calls them.
Yeah, Lagerson calls them angry bitches, but Hannah calls them
angry
annoying.
Blondes. Angry blondes.
Angry blondes. Yeah.
And you said that should be a punk band, and I said
Hannah calls them angry bitches, right? Annoying bitches.
Yeah.
So after the Mickelson scene at TV1, we see Birgitte at a press event right before the state dinner about the negotiations. Jackie, my cat just jumped on the table. Sorry if you heard a noise. There's a beetle flying around and she's chasing it, which she shouldn't because it's a stink bug. And if she eats it, she's going to foam at the mouth. But anyway, telling you, crisis is all around.
Want to go step out and do that and I'll talk?
No, I can't see it anymore. I don't know where it went.
All right.
So, but if you hear meowing, that's what it is. Okay. So, TV1 asks if negotiations are on standby, and of course there are not. Birgitte expresses optimism about everything. Bent and Amir are sent off to finish up in their groups. It's not looking bad for Amir. He's got progress happening. He's done a really great job. I really like his character. I've seen this actor in other shows, and every time I see him, I get excited because I think he's excellent.
Yeah.
So for Amir at least is doing well. Oh my goodness. Hang on a second. I think I'm missing a page because I had printer problems.
Okay, so you look for that. And as you're doing that, I will say I love seeing Hannah Holm and Katrine back at it again.
Yes,
And
me too.
the storyline here that they're chasing and trying to get to the bottom of is quite climactic. And I just, again, how much we love Hannah Holm, and we would love to work with Hannah Holm. We want a job at TV1, actually. Is there not a position?
Yes,
TV1?
I would love to have it.
I can
yes,
work there
sign me up.
Hannah Holm, yeah.
Sign me up to, and the pay seems pretty good.
Yeah, but also the respect that Katrine always has for Hannah Holm. We talked about that a lot, and how sort of Hannah leads them into these great ideas and these daring situations, right?
Yeah, and I love it. They just disregard Torben's orders. Like they're just like, we're not doing that. I love it. It's great. And most of the time they act like, okay, they're being disobedient, but their journalistic instincts are spot on. They're always quite correct. In most of the time, they're correct. They kind of remind me of, speaking of, we just talked in our bonus episode recording about The Wire. They remind me of, they got a little bit of that McNulty thing going on. So, okay, I found my notes. So sorry about that. So Bent and Amir are off to finish up in their groups. It's looking pretty good for Amir. Casper's confronted by Katrine with the story from Mikkelsen, revealing that North Kharun has cheated the South out of 10% of the oil revenue in the amount of about $1 billion a year over the past 5 years. Casper says like that will ruin negotiations. So he's like, I can't use this information. There's no way I can use this information. He shows Katrine what they have accomplished. The Green River Group has finished, giving 3.6 million citizens the right to choose if they belong to the North or South. The second group is also about to close their negotiations. There's good progress with the oil group. The two presidents are face to face for the first time in 2 years, so everything's come back around. And land and oil distribution are being decided using democracy and not warfare. And as they're standing there, the second group is finished. Casper's point is that one story of corruption and cheating will be irrelevant if the peace settlement is completed and goes forward. Then if he goes forward with this information about corruption, it will ruin the chances for permanent resolutions. Okay. And so as Birgitte exits the state dinner, the permanent secretary informs her that there's this problem with the news story in Mikkelsen and all of these kinds of things. So let me switch back to the media section. Okay. As the negotiations are carrying on, TV1 is planning a story on the helicopters. As the negotiation montage goes on at Parliament, Katrine and Han dig up more on Mikkelsen. Okay, so this is how Katrine finds out those statistics about oil revenue being stolen. A source Katrine speaks to says Mikkelsen is facing problems with false identity corruption and bribery accusations, and that Mikkelsen would have known that massacres would be taking place because of his activity regarding oil exploration. However, there's a lack of proof and no one to quote on it. They can't get anyone to go on record, and Hannah thinks the story can't hold water. She says, let's hand it over to documentary, presumably to do the lengthy research that's necessary and leave it at that for a later time. But Katrine has one more idea. She calls Mikkelsen's house and tells, presumably his wife, that TV1 will be doing a documentary on him, and the theme is violation of international law and corruption. And does she have a comment on that? She does not, but Katrine says, tell him the working title is Merchant of Death, which I thought was a great title. This should get a response. And Hannah says, nice work, can't teach you any more tricks. So within a few minutes, Mikkelsen's calling Katrine on her mobile, and that's when Katrina gets that information. So during the state dinner, Katrine and Hannah are talking to Mikkelsen. He hides behind the business in Kharun being complicated and denies personal involvement in the massacres and so on. Katrine says, in that case, go on air and explain yourself. And he says his living is based on integrity. Ha, that's cute. He's done nothing wrong. And his network doesn't like having his network of people, his contacts don't like having reporters sniffing around. He makes a deal with them, offering information vital to the peace talks in return for being left alone. Hannah says if there's anything in the story, we'll consider backing off. It must be good because he presents them with this legal agreement to sign and like, okay, we're agreeing that you're not going to use me as a source. And then he presents them with the oil sales account. Next, we see them show up in Casper's, Katrine shows up in Casper's office with that information about the stolen oil revenue. And Casper's like, we can't talk about this right now because it will ruin the peace talks. And he's not wrong, actually. That can't be talked about at that point. So, but because this information has come to light, you have the prime minister, the permanent secretary, Casper, Katrine, Han, and Torben in a meeting.
Yeah.
Birgitte wants facts. Okay. Tell me what you know. Hannah says the figures they have are true, that the North has chewed the South out of 7 to 8 billion dollars over the last 5 years. Who knows this? Asks the prime minister. Hannah says the people in this room, North Kharun, and our source. The source is never questioned. I have a note about that at the end of this. So I'll wrap this up and then talk about that point. Birgitte personally asks them not to run the story and to preserve the peace talks. If they run the story, the Chinese helicopters are delivered to the North arms them, and war breaks out that will be impossible to stop. This will lead to another refugee crisis, famines, epidemics, and all the other horrors that go along with warfare that we see over and over and over again in the actual world, in the real world. Torben insists that the results of war aren't TV1's area of responsibility. They only run truthful and objective news. And Birgitte, ever the diplomat, says, that's your right to run the story, but please reconsider. Hannah ensures confidentiality of the meeting and then offers to hold the story if peace talks are successful, but will run it if war, in fact, does break out later, to which the prime minister agrees. And Hannah hands over the binder that Mikkelsen gave them. So this is a huge demonstration of real democratic process and what actual freedom really looks like. To use rights like freedom of the press and information responsibly when it affects huge numbers of people's lives is amazing. There's no disinformation. There's no conspiracy. There's no request from a leader of a private media company to withhold this. There is a request from a leader of a private media company to withhold a story to prevent war. He's asked to withhold the story to prevent war. Okay. Does this happen in real life? I don't know, but probably sometimes it does. Wait on this story. Please don't reveal the story. It will affect this political outcome. Now, there's something called the Press Freedom Index, which is compiled by Reporters Without Borders. Okay. Denmark is ranked number 2 in terms of press freedom by the Press Freedom Index. That means they have the second highest ranking in terms of freedom of the press. So what journalists are actually able to report, responsibility, and journalistic rights. Okay. There is, in fact, a TV2 in Denmark, which has recently come under fire in a documentary about sexism and its practices, which is interesting because we see that happen to Katrine and Hannah casually over and over again at TV1 with
Ulrich's comments.
Yeah, Ulrich's comments, Torben's comments sometimes, this kind of casual sexism that gets tossed around. This caused change amongst Danish media to better protect female journalists. Isn't that fantastic? So freedom of the press and responsibility means things like this happening between government and the media. Like, we're not asking you to lie. We're not asking you to change a story. We're asking you to prevent a war. And so I think that's super important. And considering that, currently in the political climate that we face in the real world with disinformation, with conspiracy theories, with the lunatic fringe having a very loud voice in very large and strong democracies, USA, I'm looking at you, then it's very important that we remember that not all countries run this way, but that in fact, I would say things like press freedom and true democracy are actually not the common way of doing things. Yeah, given the state of the world that we're in. And I think a lot of people in Western countries forget that that's the case. Yeah, so that's kind of interesting. So in the final scenes, okay, Bent reports to Lakoya. Bent reports that Lakoya is ready to sign the peace agreement, but Amir says Al-Jawar wants to reopen oil revenue discussions, which causes Birgitte to hand Al-Jawar the documents acquired by Hannah and Katrine from Mikkelsen, indicating the cheating. This is a huge flex. This is a power move, and I love it. She says, if you sign, this information stays confidential. You keep your cheat money, and you can carry on with what is set out in the peace agreement. If not, she'll make the information public in Denmark as the reason the peace talks broke down.
Yes, and she talks about she has the right to inform the people in her country, around the world, what the real reason of this negotiation failure is.
Yes, and it would be that, right? And he signs, okay, right? He signs, because the next scene we see is a press conference with her and the two presidents declaring peace. The peace talks a success.
Yeah.
Brigitte is able to thank everyone, in particular Amir, for their help. She thanks him for his skill, his unwavering precision, and his elegance. And I actually think he had wet eyes in that scene, which was fabulous.
Yep, I agree. To show him becoming emotional and very moved by these words.
Yeah, and she also follows his advice on how to deal with, like, Islamic customs and stuff. Like, her hair is covered, she doesn't shake hands,
right?
She's respectful. She doesn't make a show of, like, I'm the Westerner coming here to stomp your waist.
She doesn't flex her skin color. She doesn't flex her position as a president in or prime minister in Denmark. She's very respectful, and I do think that the success of these negotiations is largely because of Amir.
Yeah,
knew how to get inside the head of these guys. He knew how to, sort of gingerly step over and between.
And it's
certain couldn't have known that, right? She's not culture,
and he's not there with the talks for Jacob Lakoya, because he's like, if I appear with you when you're talking to him, it'll look like you're supporting the North, and that will just disrupt things because of.
That's right. I thought it was actually very brilliant that he did that. He was not ego driven to say, well, I don't care, I'm here, I'm a star. He said, no, I'm going to back out because it's going to offset the balance here.
Yeah, and he handles his group, his negotiating group is the first one to clear all their agenda and to, like, seal that deal.
Right.
So he's an incredible diplomat too.
Yeah.
I almost want to see, like, sometimes when I watch these episodes, I'm like, I want to see this show like from a parallel point of view. Like, I want to see just Amir's story. Like, it would be so interesting. Anyway, Katrine back at TV1, this is the wrap up of TV1, says, of the media section, says she does not want to run the story about Mikkelsen, and this amazes Torben, but she argues that many lives are at stake, like before they hand over the information to the to the PM. And she doesn't want to hand it over. Too many lives are at stake. It's not worth it. And that's when Torben gets the call from the prime minister to go to the PM's office, and they make this kind of deal of not to release the story. And as they watch the prime minister declare the peace talks a success, Torben says to Hannah, in perhaps the biggest revelation of the whole episode, that he owes her and admires her work. Like, to me, that's like the biggest achievement of, never mind North and South Kharun making peace. Torben makes peace with Hannah Holm. It's a miracle, an absolute miracle. So in the wrap up at home, where things kind of, are tense. I mean, we see Laura as Magnus continues to be, Magnus is worried about Laura skipping pills. We see Laura go around the kitchen checking that everything is turned off or unplugged in the middle of the night. Lack of medication is affecting her. Magnus questions her because he wakes up and catches her, and she says, it's none of your business. And he asks in his child way, why do you do all this weird stuff?
Yeah.
So Laura calls Birgitte asking, like, are you going to tell mom? Are you going to tell? Are you going to tell on me? And he won't tell, he says, but he's obviously worried. Okay.
Yeah.
So
doesn't know what to do. I mean,
he knows that this is not right. And he knows he's trying to protect Laura from the wrath of mom using the child code of not ratting not being a rat.
Yeah.
But also, like, if he doesn't rat and something happens to her, it's going to be his fault.
Yeah.
From his point of view.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Birgitte calls back. Laura covers for both of them and said Magnus had a nightmare and she didn't want to wake the au pair. Okay. And then after the peace talks appear to be wrapping up, Birgitte speaks to Laura again, who continues to hide her pill skipping, and she speaks to both of them. Laura is continually afraid that he will rat her out. Like, she speaks to Magnus on the phone, and Laura's like staring at him.
Nervous, yeah.
Yeah, but it doesn't happen. Okay. And then in the final scenes of the whole episode, all the lovely unity and peace is broken a bit on the home front when Birgitte receives a call that Laura has locked herself in the bathroom and is not well. A very scared and teary Anne and Magnus are there with when Birgitte rushes home, and that's when Magnus tells Anne that Laura hasn't been taking her medication. I can see how this is a very hard position for a little brother to be put in. He has loyalty, like I said, to the child code, not to tell, but he also knows that not telling could mean his sister is going to be very unwell and something bad could happen to her, and it does. Birgitte does this awesome, she kicks the door down. And like the mom, I mean, I kind of hate this expression, but like the mama bear comes out, the protector comes out. The person who's responsible for Laura's life saves Laura's life.
Yeah.
Okay. By kicking the door down. So Laura's in a very poor state. She's unable to communicate. She's kind of in the throes of a very extreme, almost catatonic anxiety attack. It's like a seizure almost. It's quite dramatic. It's really scary to see. I've seen some dramatic things at school with kids, but nothing that terrifying. She's admitted to hospital and stabilized, and the doctor tells Philip, who has come rushing there, and Magnus that girls often stop their medications to prove to themselves that they're in control of something because everything else is out of control, which is completely understandable. I mean, that's why girls develop eating disorders and other, sort of controlling habits like that actually are not good for them. And a lot of young people feel like the world is increasingly out of control and have huge amounts of anxiety around states of world, with meds or without them. And especially post-pandemic, I've seen this as a very common thread with my students. They're much more anxious than they were before. And this generation is much more anxious than our generation was. It's just like stockpiling, it seems. Something is going to need to be done. I don't know what, but something's going to need to be addressed to the young people and their mental health. Something has to be done. At the very end, Birgitte and Philip are sitting in the hospital corridor with Magnus, all exhausted. And on a TV, there's Torben and Ulrich discussing the prime minister's victory, but Birgitte starts to cry because there's no victory at home. And that's the final frontier and the place that matters most in the long run. So that was a long one. Sorry, people.
Yeah, that was a long one.
With us.
Yeah.
Sorry for any mispronunciations as I rushed through. Cut me a break. I speak through 2.5 languages or so, and Danish isn't one of them. So yeah.
Scandinavian languages, none of them.
No, not even close.
Not even close.
Not even close.
So why don't we go into a little discussion about this? And yes, we do apologize. This is probably running a bit longer than usual, but like we said, it was a very dense episode. And we wanted to have them back to back because it actually is. 7 is part 1 to Amy's.
You can't separate
part 2. So we couldn't really separate them. So do you want me to start a discussion?
Yes. Yeah.
So I will say an overall comment about Borgen, which is why we love it. And a lot of, the fans of Borgen, from what I gather from reading social media comments and comments on the internet, is that the show is so packed. The show never insults the audience by, again, recycling, traditional plot lines over and over again. It's never insulting to the audience that way. And to me, again, it's like one shock after another in these peace negotiations. When this stuff comes out about, I thought it was a real plot twist to learn that the North was skimming money from the South, as if that was not heavy and dramatic enough. We have a plot twist to now say, well, actually the North was skimming from the South, and how beautifully and brilliantly that sort of packs more drama into the story for Birgitte to then say, well, if you agree, we let this go. If we don't, you know what I mean? She's now got so much ammunition in her pocket.
Yes. And also that seems, in terms of internal conflicts like these about resources, that seems like a fairly common thing as well. There's always corruption involved as well,
But how many
I
times
mean,
does the corruption come out? And I think it's shocking when it comes out, right? Because for me, this whole situation is shocking to begin with.
it
We're fighting
depends.
peace negotiations and talks.
Yeah.
When you start to unpeel things, you see there's more and more and more and more problems, right?
Yeah.
And you see the same thing in Brigitte's home, where we have a plan. Laura's going to take this medication. She's seeing the therapist, but then you peel off more layers and you realize Laura doesn't want this, and she's not taking her meds. She's now involved. Her brother is somewhat of an accomplice to this story.
Yeah, a co-conspirator.
Child is so confused. Both children are so confused what to do, but again, I love the drama and intricacies of Borgen.
Yeah, and it's dramatic without necessarily being over the top. Like, I believe Laura's storyline. I believe that that's something that real people really face. I've seen my students do that.
Yeah.
I had a kid have a complete meltdown in an online MUN meeting at one point about like home issues and anxiety and stuff, and like a very similar story to Laura's, and that's very realistic. One of the other things to point out, I mean, we're obviously very invested in the show and in the storylines, and we have faith in Brigitte's government to do the right thing all the time. But one of our friends pointed something out to you, which is Brigitte's involvement in Africa an example of colonialism? More or less, that was the question, right?
Or savior. I think friend worded it as savior complex.
Savior
right?
complex, yeah.
Realistic. And I took that comment to Amy, and maybe briefly, Amy, you want to comment on what?
Yeah.
When I asked you that question from our friend, I said, "Is this real? Like, is this show gone a little too?
Is it a little too easy?
Is a little, was it a little too,
so you want to
tidy? Want to comment briefly on what your thoughts were?
Yeah,
I asked you.
I think, like, in terms of time and like how quickly this episode came together, like she goes there, these negotiations happen in like 3 days. That never happens in diplomacy. Very, very rarely, I think.
I think it was 5 days, but it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
That's the point you're trying to make, right? That it's
not
5 days.
Yeah, no. Very, very rarely. And if something is settled in 5 days, in like another 5 days, it's like blown out of the water again. I guess, a historical example, maybe we should, this is something I should have looked up before I talked about this, was like the Suez Canal crisis with Lester B. Pearson. Didn't he negotiate that? The guy on our $5 bill? I think he did. But anyway, that was a successful negotiation. But like even I know this from doing model UN and stuff, and like realistically, conflicts in developing nations where Western nations step in to do negotiations, it doesn't always work very well. And I pointed out the example of Rwanda, which was a unmitigated disaster. There's the war in Somalia as well that didn't go right. There's do you know how many years the US was involved in Afghanistan?
No.
20. It was longer than Vietnam. And I don't think a lot of people realize that. And so it's like all of these proxy wars are like, Western involvement doesn't seem to often solve problems. It often seems to exacerbate problems as far as diplomacy and warfare is concerned.
So let me ask you a part B. Do you think in a negotiation, it makes a difference to have a woman do it?
I don't know, because I can't think
touched upon this as you think. Say one thing as you get the wheels turning there. We did talk about this in season 1 when Birgitte went to talk to Yvonne, who was part of Hesselbo's party.
Yes.
Brilliantly, they had things to talk about, which may not have been very pleasant, but the way they did it, they had like tea out and things to eat, and it was a casual, frank discussion. Yeah. There was no big macho ego in here.
That's right. But it was also a female Danish politician to a female Danish politician. The cultural background, the framework is identical. They're coming from the same place. That's easy. That's very easy.
That's easy. But here you've got two leaders of a developing nation, men of color, men of different religions.
Yeah. And different extremity in their religions.
Yes. And how is a white woman from Denmark received there?
Yeah,
right?
exactly. And yeah, I think like as much as we want to say like, oh, you know, our fictional Danish PM is the champion of everything, because like she kind of is, but you know, but like realistically in the real world, I don't think that would have panned out as quickly and as easily as it did. And maybe on like the show writer's part, like I almost feel like the idea that like the white savior / colonialism, Western interference aspect just got glossed over. Like that's not been addressed. But to some degree, in Borgen season 4, The Power and the Glory, that gets reopened. It's a slightly different situation because Greenland is a de facto colony, kind of like a territory of Denmark,
Yeah.
with obvious political ties. We'll get into that when we get to season 4. But they're also like an independent culture, and so it's sort of addressed a little bit more so looking at that, and it's probably something that the show would have been criticized about, probably in the Danish press. Not that I can read Danish, but as we know, okay, like I can say like thank you, and like that's about it.
Yeah.
So tak. Everybody can say that. Yeah, tak. Yeah. So so I think from that point of view, it's overly simplistic, but I think when you look at the sort of elements that they pulled into this conflict to make it into a conflict, I think they were quite accurate about some of those. But like, only this would have taken like 30 years and not like 5 days.
Not 5 days. So
yeah.
I'll then move on and ask you a final question that, as you were talking there, was jotting things down. I was really afraid that the story would have leaked. And I wonder how much, as you touched upon in your summary there, how often does this happen where behind the scenes there are these sort of let's shake hands and agree that we won't run a story for the bigger benefit. And how much freedom and right does the press have to do with that? Because the press's, the news story and the journalists, their first responsibility should be to inform the public and bring an unfiltered story to the forefront, right? A raw story to the forefront. Were they at fault in not bringing this out? I mean, or are they seen as part of the, I don't want to use the word corruption, but part of the plan to hold it, right? Because they could have flipped this around very easily and said, nope, I'm not listening to you. We don't owe that to you, Prime Minister.
Yeah. Well, Torben did say that.
He did say that. And then it was Hannah Holm that kind of said, well, no, let's think about this. If the peace negotiations are successful, we do not run the story. And if they fail, then we run the story. But again, negotiation between woman to woman, this is where Torben took the back seat, which was great. And secretly always recognizes Hannah Holm as a woman stock and great skill. He let her do this.
Yeah, and that's why he says what he says about like, I admire your work. Yeah, because it's really her that ends up making, because of that deal, like
with her leading Katrine to get this information with the binder. Because if
but I mean specifically in that scene, it's Hannah Holm's decision to like, this is how we're going to handle this situation. Yeah, and Torben doesn't think that fast. But she's always rapid fire thinker. Yeah. So I think the press did the responsible thing by not publishing that story, because it wouldn't have served any purpose except to cause more conflict. It would have broken down the peace negotiations. And as Casper pointed out to Katrine, it would have potentially created a war that would affect 3.6 million people. Yeah. So to harm 3.6 million people just so you can be right is kind of bullshit.
The first one to report on a story. It's definitely not worth it. And what I feel like in this whole series actually is how big of a character the press is. and the
Yes.
journalists are, and the angle of a story and the questions you would ask someone, because
Yeah.
it really does sort of set the tone here for a lot of things,
Yeah.
right?
And that's,
journalists
yeah.
are so key in all this.
And that's also how we know the series wasn't made after 2016. Because after 2016, with Trump getting into the White House and the media landscape kind of globally changing, because it's like, let's face it, it's all connected. Okay.
Yeah.
The disinformation machine and the paranoia and the distrust has grown. And like the use of social media, the use of Twitter as a news source, the use of like a lot of news breaks on Twitter. Right?
Yeah.
Like before, news broke on TV news, like at
In the
6 o'clock.
newspaper. Yeah.
In the paper. Yeah. In the morning paper. That doesn't happen anymore.
No.
News breaks on Twitter.
No.
And this is like, I have a Twitter account because I need to figure out what's happening in Turkey. And the press is perfectly free here. Of course. They have great press freedom in Turkey.
I see you rolling your eyes. Yes.
The leader is great. We love the leader. The leader is doing a good job.
Yeah. But you see, the problem is now with the advent of social media, and social media is great for so many things, as we all can acknowledge, but is that anybody now can publish a story, anybody can have a blog, anybody can get up on Twitter, but the responsibility of the listener or the viewer is that you must check your sources. You must check.
Yeah, and people don't do that. And
who's saying it?
Yeah, and they don't.
Which TV station? Did a TV station endorse this? Then maybe it's not right. Did a newspaper
or some random crackpot?
Yeah, and the responsibility of the viewer or listener is always to check your sources. Like,
and honestly,
the headline you see.
I don't think the average news reader or average person looking at news online or whatever online, YouTube videos or whatever, has the ability or the time or the interest to bother checking sources.
I think it's because we have been in now the scroll culture. Everything is a quick scroll. Yep. You don't read
look at, believe it. Look at the way social media can be used to set someone up in such a way that they lose a court case.
Yep. Yep.
That, that a different court case in another country ran, and where the opposite party was found guilty. And yet that court case happens in America. You know which one I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Right. The Amber Heard, Johnny Depp thing. We're probably going to get hate mail about this, but I don't care. So in the UK, it's very hard to win libel cases in the UK. And in fact, the Daily Mail, which is even a fairly crummy tabloid express type newspaper, won. And they, based on 12 out of 14 charges were found by that judge in the UK to be valid enough for the paper to have published a headline calling Johnny Depp a wife beater. But in America, in an open courtroom with a non-sequestered jury and a pop media campaign, I'm saying pop media because like TikTok and stuff were involved, all these supporters of him cherry picking little moments out of the trials, and which were broadcast and should not have been. And they were not in the UK because they don't do things like that there. And showing, Amber Heard is this like crazy crackpot woman. Well, of course she can't be. He's right and she's wrong. But based on what? It's not based on the judgment. It's, I realize she was asked to pay him damages and he was also asked to pay her damages, but less. But like, my point is, it's this out of control media machine that influenced the outcome of that case.
Yes.
And I stand by that. And I'm like, I stand by that. I will not be swayed on this. I've had my students argue with me about it. And I'm like, you guys don't understand how to think critically about what you're viewing online.
Well, that's what I was going to say.
A TikTok video is not a news source.
That's right. And it was not a comprehensive, unbiased review of the transcript in its entirety.
Exactly.
Cherry picked.
And recently, all these Johnny Depp fans petitioned the Virginia state or whatever, state of Virginia, to release these court documents of all of the stuff that, do you know how much redacted stuff was in it does not make him look better. It makes him look worse. And in fact, I did read the judgment from the UK trial in its entirety.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And I said, like, if you want a reasonable look at the case, go read that. That's a primary source. That came from a judge who made a decision without the influence of the media. That's my take.
Bringing it back to Borgen, then there was a lot of justice done in these final scenes here, talking about having the binder on the table, everyone discussing the punchline of it, but also knowing the background of it as well, and making an informed decision that if let's do this and this, and it was agreeable for everyone. It wasn't one person bulldozing their way forward. And I thought it was great, but the end of the episode left me a little bit scared of like, well, what if someone does leak it? But then again, this was back in 10 years ago when, Twitter and whatever was not as rampant as it is now. Like,
well, it was pretty
professionals to
Twitter, like when I arrived in Turkey, I arrived in 2012. In 2013, the Gezi Park protests happened against the development of a shopping mall in one of the last parks in central Istanbul. And the government cracked down very much on the press at that point, and Twitter was one of the ways that people got information around. And so it sort of, for me, it kind of started taking off then as a source of relatively reliable news. And to the point where it was banned. Twitter access was banned in Turkey, was shut off for a while and stuff during those protests. Because of, inciting violence. And like, there's been, ever since then, there's been a lot of crackdown here on crowds. A rock festival called the Olive Rock Festival, Zeytin Festival, it was recently canceled because of fears of public safety. But who's the public being kept safe from? These are concert goers who want to go watch a concert. It's been happening every year for like decade, like a while. So there was a bit of an uproar about that. I mean, so, like I said before, I mean, in Western countries, you have the freedom, if, COVID restrictions aside and stuff, in normal times, you've got the freedom to go to a concert and like see your,
favorite people
perform. Like, and that's not an issue. And like the only reason things would be canceled would be like due to illness or like, I guess safety concerns, like something after what Woodstock 99 happened, but nobody would ever fund a concert like that again. Right. So, but that was allowed to happen, even though there were concerns about how that concert was set up. So like, there's still this kind of freedom in most, in the developed / Western world, but in a lot of the other parts of the world, Turkey's not exactly undeveloped. It's definitely like Istanbul is a very modern city. I hate to say this, my poor Toronto friend, but our public transportation system annihilates yours.
Without a doubt. I'm the first to speak out against Toronto public transit. I think it's small and terrible,
it's inadequate for the size of the city.
To bring this back to Borgen, I want to say also, I started talking about how this show, there's layers and layers of like shock and complexity to come out.
Yes.
The ending of the episode as well, I also felt that it was shocking to see that, oh my God, Birgitte has gone through so much and she stayed so strong, and so she stayed the course of what she had to do, and it came out successful. But then in the final scenes, we see her collapse. It's this with her daughter that breaks her. And, she has such a tremendous victory, which this will always be associated to her legacy as a prime minister. But the problem and conflict at home to negotiate is, how do we get the daughter better? So again, to your point about Philip, it was, and their parenting style together, it was heartwarming and fantastic to see him there. And her there at the hospital, and they held hands, and we know it's not romantic. We know it's I need your support right now.
Yeah.
Thank God you're here. Let's keep it together and keep strong together as a family to help Laura through this. I
Yeah.
love seeing that. And again, the shockwaves through me throughout the whole episode, my part, episode 7, your part, episode 8. It doesn't end these shockwaves and complexity right down to the final 5 minutes of the episode.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
It's incredible.
and again, like it's just so engaging.
Yeah. And like, let's face it, like African peace negotiations sealed in 5 days makes excellent TV. But in terms of real diplomacy, ain't gonna happen.
Ain't gonna happen. But we love Birgitte Newborg so much. We're happy.
Yeah.
And like I said, these were the standout episodes for me. I thought they were just
and the
you
final scene is going to be a great transition into how the end of this season and the beginning of the next season develop.
Right. And with that, we should probably wrap this one up, unless you have anything to say, Amy. We can
we've been talking for a long time. This
long time.
Very dense. Yeah.
Sorry. I hope you've enjoyed this conversation here. These were very dense episodes, and
break it up and listen to it in parts if you have to. Listen to the episode 7 first and then the episode 8.
So listen to it on the drive to work, and then you can listen to it on your walk to lunchtime, and then your drive and then your exercise session at the gym. We'll keep you company all day.
Yeah, exactly.
With that, we'd like to thank our listeners for joining us on this long episode, longer than normal episode. You can check us out on our website, theborgenpodcast.com, where all of our podcast episodes are archived, and you can learn more about us and about the show. And don't forget to subscribe to us so you know when the next episodes come out. We'd like to thank our good friend Garth Jensen for providing our intro and outro music. Thank you very much, Garth. And lastly, don't forget to check us out on all social media platforms. We are there and we'd love to hear from you. Don't forget to connect with us and share what's on your mind by using the hashtag #TheBorgenPodcast, or by sending us an email or voice memo to theborgenpodcast@gmail.com.